called to do at this moment. Okay. All right, everybody. Go ahead and ground yourself wherever you are. If there are distractions, try to eliminate those distractions and center ourselves on this work. Oh God, we give you thanks, oh God, that as we see the sun beginning to set, that is evidence of your protection, evidence that you have guarded us on this day, that what could have happened did not happen. God, is evidence that you have blessed us with so many things that many others are not blessed with, God. God, we thank you for the blessing of food and clothing and shelter and the gift of others to support us and for us to support them. God, we thank you, Lord God, for those that you have placed in such high offices as Dr. Williams, God, and we ask, God, a blessing upon her. And Lord, we thank you for her as the first female being in this position. God, what a privilege, what a great charge that you have given to her, God. And we pray a blessing upon her and her family, God, that you would continue to just keep her, God. We ask now, Lord, that you would bless this conversation, even as we remember Black History Month. God, we thank you for the ancestors. We thank you for all those we stand on whose shoulders we now stand. God, we pray for our children, God, that our children might be lifted up, that they might have a sense of pride in who they are and where they come from, that they would be always motivated by the fact that there is nothing that they cannot do. We lift them up tonight to you. We ask this all in the mighty, blessed name of our Lord God Almighty and my Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Listen, everybody, if you could go ahead and mute your phone so that we can cut down on any distractions that we might hear in the background. Turn off your cameras if you would like. As we begin tonight, just a brief introduction. This is Justice and Beyond. Justice and Beyond has been organizing in collaboration with many other organizations for about 9 years now. We started with working for justice for Bernadette Johnson and Judge Bernadette Johnson to the Supreme Court. And so we began there, and we have been fighting for justice on several fronts and several aspects of our community and outside the New Orleans community for many years now. And so we are a collective of different organizations that come together to work towards justice with what we call our pillar organizational model. And what that means is that we do not uplift one or even two people as the sole leaders of Justice and Beyond, but we want you to know that Justice and Beyond is led by many different people, some in front of the camera, very forward facing like myself, and others that are behind the scenes doing the work. But we work primarily in the area of housing, education, juvenile justice, health, the environment and environmental justice as well too. And so we want to make sure that everybody is cared for and has the things that we're talking about tonight: access, accountability, and equity. And so as we begin, again, we welcome you. Know this, that Justice and Beyond is a safe space, a space that we want to guide ourselves by the principles of love and respect and peace. We can disagree, but we don't ever want to disrespect anyone in this space. We want to be safe for everyone. In honor of Black History Month, as it comes to a close, we would like to have a moment of reflection. I invited a friend of mine, Dr. Akula. I don't know if he's here yet. I don't know Valerie or Brooke or anybody else behind the scenes. Dr. Akula, you here?
Yes.
Good. Thank you, my friend. I've invited my dear friend, Dr. Akula, to share. I want to keep it to about 5 minutes at max, Dr. Akula. But if you would please go ahead and we'll give you the floor before we have our presentation in honor of Black History Month.
Thank you, Reverend Manning. And I was just checking to see, am I okay to share a PowerPoint, or is it possible? No, it's actually not possible.
I I think
Go
it
ahead.
is. Brooke, can
Let
we
me-
manage that?
Can you make me where I can share? Okay, there you go.
There we go. Okay. Would you do this in 5 minutes, Dr. Akula?
I will have just slides to see where I can actually make my points and just a
Very good. You're still
very
there?
concise
Okay.
thing. So basically, I'll present. Yeah. I'm trying to get this. I just have a few slides that I'm going to present, and this is about a Tuskegee experiment. It's the longest human study that ever had anywhere on Earth. America, the greatest nation there, that put through 600 poor Black men through no treatment. Well, there was a treatment established later on in the 50s, and there was actually a law in 1943 requiring all Americans to be tested and treated. Unfortunately, they were not. So essentially, they were told that they had this bad blood, which is anemia, syphilis, and all this stuff. And they were giving, some iron tonic, aspirin, and that sort of thing. And just look at this, all these laws pertaining to a treatment, diagnosis and treatment all over the national, international law. Every law is being broken. And these poor Black men, 600 of them went to their grave without treatment. And it is the saddest thing that I'm here to say. And the irony of all this is the physicians were given a list of all these people to not treat these patients. So they actually circulated among the doctors. And obviously, of course, almost all of them were white doctors. So they were told, don't treat them. They will come over here. Some of them were trying to get drafted. They want to serve. They want to defend the country. They were actually trying to defend their own freedom. So they were told, no, we got to treat you. So that's why we don't want you to be in the services. So basically, all in all, these people died, and 600 of them, actually, to get you frankly, it's 623 of them. So this United States Public Health Service gave him no treatment while the penicillin was the treatment. And it was very historic that I need to mention in 1947, this penicillin was discovered. And it is a historic event because this is the year in which the India attained independence from Britain. And the reason why I'm saying is in the British area, there is something, it's called, there's a British physician who said, Thomas Percival in 1803 on medical ethics, he claimed there is a beneficent deception where if men do not perceive it as an injury to be deceived, that there is no crime in false speech about such matters. No longer governs for notion of informed consent or ethics. So this is outrageous that these poor Black people were led to death. And the sad part is, in closing, we got a lot of slides and a lot of these things that I wanted to present, but unfortunately, given the time, I just want to make 2 points. One of them is, in Europe, the president of the United States sends an American judge to sit on the bench to do exactly, inflict, all the severe pain for all those Nazi doctors that did very similar or maybe lesser crimes of human experimentation. Guess what? More than 5 doctors have been hanged to death. And here we have 600 people, poor Black people that died. None of them paid any heed, and nobody got to tasks. And the final part of the injustice was that finally they sought, a class action suit. With Fred Gray was the lawyer, and they came in with $9 million to settle the lives of 600 and plus people. And guess what? Adding to that insult, President Trump recently, I'm not talking about the history long time back, just recently saw there was money still remaining. So he said, you know what? We're going to get it back to the government. We're not going to give it to them anymore. So this is the story of injustice of all those poor Black, 623 of them our treatment, and I wanted to, invoke their spirits to let them know that, their lives are, their stories of suffering, is being related today. And I want to thank, this opportunity, Dr. Manning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akula, for that presentation on the Tuskegee syphilis study. Indeed, and we want to always make it clear that when so often people try to make the correlation between this Tuskegee syphilis study and people receiving vaccinations for COVID, it's very different, because these 600 souls, men, Black men, were denied treatment. Were not given treatment just to see the effects of syphilis, and it's much different from getting a COVID vaccine, which we do encourage. And so, thank you so much for that presentation tonight. All right, with that being said, hope you all learned something from that. I also know that there's a play called Miss Evers' Boys that's about the Tuskegee syphilis study. And so check that out too, if you ever get a chance. And so with no further ado, I would like to first thank our guest moderator tonight, Miss Ashana Bigard, and want to hand it over to her as she carries on this conversation with our guest, the Superintendent of Nola Public Schools, Dr. Avis Williams. Welcome to you both.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you, Justice and Beyond. Thank you to Betty DeMarco. Thank you, Reverend. And of course, thank you, Dr. Avis, for agreeing to this.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So let's get started, because we don't have a lot of time. So I want to ask you the first question first. And this question you've been asked before, but I'm going to ask it a little different. So what is your vision of for New Orleans Public Schools, but now that you've seen the landscape? Because I know you had a vision coming in, but now that you've seen the landscape, I know that you probably have more of an idea of what you want for New Orleans Public Schools.
Yeah. So absolutely a great question. I will say that my vision is based on my core values, and hopefully most of you have had an opportunity to look at the 100-day plan and maybe even attended some of the ABC tour meetings. I know, Ashana, you've attended them, and I did talk about my core values there. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to round out by addressing some of my observations and how that may drive how we move forward from here. So my core values are excellence, equity, and joy. And excellence, because that's what our scholars deserve. That's what our community deserves. And so when I think about excellence, it's really just about making sure that we're using the most effective practices in terms of teaching and learning, but also that we're giving our schools the resources and supports that they need to do right by our scholars. And that's whether we're talking about literacy centers or after school programming or whatever the case may be. And that's certainly an area that I heard a lot about during the ABC tour. And I still hear it from our scholars, and I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that as we move through the conversation. Equity. So for me, equity is all about removing barriers and providing access. And I love that access is one of the tenets behind Justice and Beyond, because one thing that I've learned, and being here has helped reinforce this for me, that access and availability are not synonymous. Right? Because one thing that I do see is that we've got available resources, but that does not mean that all of our families have equal access to those resources. And I'll use our pre-K as an example. We've got 5,000 seats plus, and they're not all full. And so one of the things that we had to do was take a step back, look at it through an equity lens, and determine, what are the barriers to accessing the available seats that we have, and then rethinking how we communicate with families, rethinking how we market, rethinking how we respond when parents have questions or get stuck in whether it's technical difficulties or language barriers. So from an equity lens, really looking at what it means to make sure that access is for all, and that the barriers are removed. And then, of course, joy, my personal favorite core value. And for me, it's about celebrating what's good while staying the course on the things that we know we need to work with. And I found a quote recently, and it was listed as anonymous, but it basically said that joy is happiness that's not dependent upon what happens. And that comes from within. And for me, it comes from loving what I do and having a deep down desire to improve outcomes for the babies within our community. Now, in terms of the second part of your question, of course, as I have visited schools, as I've engaged in conversations through the ABC tour meetings and met with everyone from families and scholars and school leaders and legislators, there are certainly some priorities that have been lifted up. And one is making sure that we have a plan for what NOLA PS will look like in the upcoming years. And we're calling it a 5-year plan where we're really taking a deep dive of our portfolio of schools and looking at it through the lens of 4 different areas. We're looking at school quality, quantity, choice, and variety. And asking some really deep questions around each of those to determine how do we move forward in making our school district the best that it can be, while at the same time providing our families and our scholars what they need. You know, as a school district, our primary goal is to make sure that these babies are ready to be successful beyond high school. And that's whether they choose to go to college or straight to the workforce, the military like me, or something else. You know, just making sure that they have what they need to be successful. And in order to do that, we really have to take a close look at what we're offering and ask ourselves questions: what's missing as it relates to quality, quantity, choice, and variety? And this is going to be a process in terms of unpacking a number of questions with within each of those 4 areas, and then digging really deep as we look at data trends from a workforce development standpoint, as well as the data in terms of what our scholars have when they graduate. And one piece of that we've already started working on is the portrait of a graduate. And that will serve as a North Star that looks at what our scholars should be able to know and do throughout their entire schooling, so pre-K through 12. You know, and so in terms of my vision, it's still based on those core values, but I absolutely see spaces where we need to work on the quality of our schools, improving quality, ensuring that choice is a real choice, and then also making sure that the variety that we offer, the diversity of programming that we offer, fits the needs of not only our community, but also the interest and the aptitude that our scholars bring to the table.
All right, thank you. So a lot of the things that you just talked about address some of the things in the second question, which the second question is kind of big. So the second question is around percentages and who gets what access to what schools. When you talked about access, equality, so over 75% of white students go to A and B schools, while only 24% of Black students attend A and B schools. So the majority of the students who attend.
You're muted.
Ashana, you there?
Is 89%.
Ashana, I'm going to back you up a little bit because your phone got muted, so we did not hear you.
Okay.
All right.
I was going to say that 83% of the public school students who attend school right now are Black, and 89% are economically disadvantaged. But we also know when we look at A and B schools, like the Benjamin Franklins and the Lushers, there tends to be wealthier, whiter students that access the schools who have the most resources and who are the A and B schools. How do you have a plan of how to address that? Because what the community sees is the same racial lines that existed before, but more exacerbated, because there were more Black students in Lusher pre-Katrina than there are post-Katrina, for instance.
Yeah, and that's definitely a great question. And, and some of that requires that we look at the schools individually to see where the students are coming from, how much of it is geographically based. And then to your point, it doesn't make it any better if our numbers are that skewed in terms of our Black students having access to high quality schools. And then the other piece that I want to lift up is our differentiated funding, where we do have a funding system where we make sure the dollars follow our scholars in terms of need. And this this is whether you're an English learner or we're looking at it from the lens of poverty or whatever the case may be, including our special education students. One of the things that I would like to do, though, is I mentioned sharing my screen. So I want to share with you just to give you an idea of what we're looking at as it relates to these areas. And what you're talking about, for me, hits the quality, it hits choice, but it also hits variety. And so these are some of the questions that we're digging deep on. And I would be happy if anybody wants to throw in the chat box or shoot us an email later with your ideas on some of these questions, on any of these questions. So when we think about quality, how do we define it? What should this look like? And I think all of us would agree that quality has to be about making sure you've got effective teachers in every classroom and making sure that the programming is such that our scholars are being challenged, but that they also are meeting their needs and meeting them where they are. As it relates to quantity, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, this is really about our district optimization. And that's something that's absolutely a priority. And I think we'll have some time to talk about it, but it doesn't necessarily fit this specific question. So I want to talk a little bit about choice. So how do we ensure that every community has high quality schools, and what data is needed to address choice? And so as we unpack this question with our 5-year planning strategy, a number of data points are going to be necessary for us to do this. First of all, how do we even define quality? And then again, like I mentioned before, I do think that we're looking at academic outcomes as one main way that we identify quality. But then in addition to that, how do we ensure that every community has high quality schools? And even talking to, and I'm sorry, y'all, my dogs, somebody's probably walking by or a bag is flying in the street or something. Excuse my dogs. But when we think about quality in every community, what does that look like and what would it take for us to do that? And even in talking to school leaders, we've talked about the idea of having geographic zones. Is that possible? Where you've got choice, but these are your zones. Because one of the questions that I have that I really want more information on is when we think about choice, if I'm a parent and I choose for my child to go to a school all the way on the other side of town, am I doing that because that's just the school that I want to go to? Or am I passing 5 or 6 or 8 low quality schools from my perspective in order to get there? These are questions that we got to get some data to unpack. And I know some of it, anecdotally speaking, I've been given information around that absolutely sometimes that is the case. But when we look at variety, what do we currently offer in terms of variety within our schools? How do we improve it, and what data is needed to guide this work? So one of the things that we're going to do is unpack all of the programmatic structures and focus areas that we currently have within our schools. And we're going to compare that to national norms. We're going to compare it to workforce development and look at what's missing in order to truly round out high quality, diverse programming that prepares our scholars to be most successful. And I mentioned the portrait of a graduate earlier because that's going to be one of the pieces that we'll use, and it will provide some additional data points that we'll use in order to ensure that we're meeting the mark of giving our scholars what they actually need. So there's not an easy answer to the question that you have, but it is absolutely a part of what we're looking at as we consider where we're going, in this 5-year plan. Where are we going and what is our goal? And our goal is to be able to make sure that families have high quality schools. And of course, that the quantity meets where we need to be in terms of district optimization, and that choice truly is a choice. And that when we think about variety, there's enough diversity within the types of schools and the types of programming that we have so that our scholars are globally competitive. And as I mentioned, that portrait of a graduate will be one of the foundational pieces that will help us to help identify some of those areas. And I really appreciate you lifting up the data points that you shared. And I mentioned before that some of that you do have to look at from a school by school standpoint. And consider, what are the criteria for each of those schools? Is it effective in such a way that it is providing choice from a wide standpoint and from an equity standpoint. And I definitely think that we've got some work to do there. And that's what the 5-year plan is all about, driving home.
Okay, I have another question around providing support to students, impoverished students, because we know a big percentage of our public school students are impoverished. But before I ask that question, I want to ask you another question, which is how are you able to hold charter schools accountable to meet the needs of the students and community? Because right now it seems as if a lot of schools have their school plan built, but it ignores the actual on the ground needs of the students, families, and communities they serve, which is why I think a lot of them have poor outcomes.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so we know that we have a decentralized school district, and we know that within charter law, charter schools have autonomy, so they can select their personnel and curriculum and so forth. But what we do at Nola Public Schools and the Orleans Parish School Board is make sure that from a governance standpoint, we do have policies in place. And of course, we also have our contracts in place. And my team and I have had some really in-depth conversations about what are we missing in terms of the accountability piece. Because, when we think about charter law and just the whole idea of charter schools, they've got the autonomy, and that autonomy is and is supposed to be in exchange for innovative, creative programming. And then we hold them accountable by making sure that we're addressing student outcomes and facility outcomes and that sort of thing. Now, what this means for us is looking at our contracts, first of all, as contracts are being renewed, making sure that we are embedding the language within those contracts so that we are improving outcomes in terms of what schools are required to do. And then once we're at a place where we're accepting new applications, I'm really excited about the work that some of our team is engaging in with the National Alliance for Charter School Authorizers, where we're looking at the start of this whole process, which is the application process. What does it look like to develop an application that's built in with the quality that we want, the choice and the variety that we want our schools to have? And then from there, the contract, of course, would be aligned with that application. And then our accountability from there is about holding them accountable for what's in the contract. And that's a process, because right now we're not looking at adding new schools. So that application process is not something that we're currently doing. And you may recall that this year we did have a renewal cycle, and we had a number of schools that were automatically renewed because they did meet our criteria to get a new contract. We also had a number of schools that had to go through a comprehensive evaluation. And one school surrendered their charter before the evaluation was completed. And we've since assigned that school to Collegiate Academy, and that was Cohen High School. And then 3 schools that were within that comprehensive eval process were presenting data to us, school visits, and a variety of ways for us to assess whether they would get a new contract or not. And one school did not get renewed. And then the other 2 were renewed with contingencies. And what that means is that their contract will have contingencies in place that require continuous improvement. So in other words, looking at the areas that were of concern in the first place and making sure that part of their work is creating a continuous improvement plan. And this is something that's we're in the beginning process right now. Those 2 networks will have a data meeting with us in the coming month. And then of course, they'll get a new contract later this spring. And that contract will have an addendum that will also contain some specific criteria and some contingencies that have to be met in order for them to maintain their contract for the 3-year period.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna ask you this question, but then I have another question. So this question is around 83% of our students coming from impoverished homes, and they also impacted, trauma, impacted by poverty, crime, violence, and what can we as a community do to support you and schools, but what can we do around the lack of supports that our students are getting? We know they're getting a lack of supports because if we just 76% of our students are reading below grade level. And we know a lot of that has to do with all the things that are going on, but also there aren't therapists in our schools. There aren't trauma therapists. There aren't the things that should be there, just given the landscape of our communities that our students need. A lot of schools do not automatically provide uniform resources, or don't parents know that they apply for free uniforms or uniform vouchers. But if 90% of your students are on free lunch, shouldn't that be an automatic resource? I mean, there's a lot of automatic resources that should just go along with the demographic and the population of students if you care about students, if you care about who you're educating and serving. And so the question becomes, and I know because they have autonomy, you can't make them, but shouldn't we have some standards and regulations that support our students, that are ironclad, that no matter what you come with, that if you're operating a school in the city of New Orleans with our children, shouldn't there be some, and how do we go about putting that in place for the charters that exist now, not waiting 4 to 5 years for their contract to come up to renewal, not waiting for our children to be, you know, harmed a lot of times in the process of you not considering.
No, those are all really good questions. So I'll start off with what I said earlier about the differentiated funding model that we have, where we do get additional funds when the needs are greater. But I want to share with you something that we're working on, that we're going to launch sooner than later. And I have not shared. I see two of my board members here. So Mr. Zervigon and Mr. Marshall, you're hearing this. And I think I may have had some conversations with you all about this. Last month, I was in Shreveport visiting Caddo Parish, and they have this huge building that they call the Harbor. And it's all things wraparound services, everything from their truancy center to mental health supports to help for families who are looking for jobs and that sort of thing. And so we had a meeting actually just a couple of hours ago with Caddo Parish team members to learn more about what they're doing and what it would look like for us to have, you know, basically a one-stop shop. And I love the way they defined wraparound services. It's all services needed to stabilize the home. And that's what we should be providing, all of the services needed to stabilize the home. And so what would it look like if we took an existing facility? Because one of the great things about considering doing this is that we own property. If we took an existing facility and not only had our truancy, but had the counseling, had the homeless liaison, had uniforms that were available, had spaces for families to apply for jobs or get job information, you know, and even to apply for benefits and that sort of thing. And then take it a step further and meet the needs of some of our scholars, because when I talk to our scholars, they are real quick to tell me that there's not enough for them to do. You know, so what would it look like if in this same facility we had Roots of Music or Be Mike or something of that nature, where there's some after school programming? Because to your point, there are a lot of needs that our families have. And what worries me and keeps me up at night is wondering how we can provide all of that when there's so much disjointedness in terms of the services. You know, if I'm a family member and I've got multiple children in different schools and I'm on a shift worker or looking for a job or whatever the case may be, I don't have time nor the ability to do this without amazing stress to go from place to place to place trying to figure it all out. And so we are looking at the model that Shreveport is using. And this is going to be something we'll do in the short term. You all know that at Mahalia Jackson, we have a center that has a lot of services in place, but we want to expand beyond that. So that it is a space where families can ensure that all of their needs are being met. And to your point around things like uniforms and what we can do, you know, there's absolutely a space where we can make sure that, you know, schools are held accountable for the equitable treatment of all of our scholars. And, you know, when we get emails and information about things that are happening that aren't in the best interest of children, that's absolutely one of the things that we do is investigated. And sometimes it's our accountability team that's looking at it. And sometimes it's our school support team that's looking at it, so that we can provide either the information or the resources that families need. And then sometimes it may even mean that we're having a conversation with the school. And if you watch our school board meetings, you know, from time to time, we have non-compliance notices that have to be issued when there's a problem where schools have some issues around the accountability piece. So again, to your point, I absolutely agree that our scholars don't have 5 years for the adults to figure out what we're doing. I could not agree with you more on that. And at the same time, we've got to have the capacity to get it done. And I would love for this one-stop shop to be a community-wide effort. And definitely look to hear more information. I do want to say that in the coming weeks, we're having surplus property community meetings. And I'll make sure that I send this information to you guys at Justice and Beyond so you can share it with your viewers. The first meeting is on March 7th. And this is where we're having a discussion to talk about the criteria for Nola Public Schools for using and repurposing district-owned facilities. And one of the things that I want us to do is something similar to the model that Caddo Parish has, where we're using one of our existing facilities to provide the resources and supports that our families need.
Well, thank you for that. So I was going to say, one of the things that has been an issue, and I, you know, my hat as an advocate is the self-reporting and the schools not even being aware of the definition, for instance, of in-school suspension. I just went through that with a principal where I had to send her the definition of in-school suspension. So with self-reporting being how, a lot of how you get information from the individual networks and charters, do you think that access to accurate information is a problem when it comes to reauthorizing, supporting, or even terminating charters? Because a lot of the, yeah.
It's not a problem in terms of the reauthorizing so much, because we do have deep dives that we do, but it is a problem in terms of day-to-day operations as we're looking at trying to have a conversation around truancy. You know, there have been a lot of conversations about truancy and whether it's related to crime and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I push consistently is that we need data and we need clean data. I'm on the Superintendent's Advisory Council with the LDOE, and we had a meeting this morning, and actually I had a conversation with the state superintendent about this, and there are some changes that are coming down the pike in terms of data and data reporting, because believe it or not, the State Department has the same problem that we have, because the data is self-reported to the state as well. And there's not a single student information system that everyone has to use for that reporting. So this is absolutely a problem that is not something that's just isolated to us here in Orleans Parish, but it is something that we are concerned about, because as we're looking at whether it's truancy or suspensions or whatever the case may be, we have to have clean data. Otherwise, we don't know if we're solving for the right problems. And so that's something that we are working on. We are working on creating a data dashboard and some different reporting structures so that we'll be able to go to a dashboard and find various data points, including those around attendance and discipline and so forth, in a way that's much more streamlined than what we're doing now. Because I'm agreeing with you completely. The self-reporting is not the best way for us to get data, and the State Department shared the same sentiments that they're having similar concerns. And there are going to be some changes in terms of how attendance looks from the State Department's lens, and it's going to be phased in beginning next year over the next 3 years. Some minor changes in terms of what that reporting looks like and what the coding looks like at the local school level. So that's something that we'll absolutely be working with our schools on. But meanwhile, I'm excited about us getting that dashboard up and running so that we can have easier access and quicker access to data and good data so that we can make decisions and again, make sure we're solving for the right problems.
Okay, and so on that note, the seventh question is around given all of federal and state guidelines not being adhered to. So there's a lot of schools who, especially when it comes to gifted and talented, they don't, like, IEPs don't mean anything to them. How, and I mean, of course, Southern Poverty Law Center is suing a lot of our schools, and so we're suing the state for not being in compliance. So how do you, I mean, do you have any plans to help schools, I mean, understand the law better? Because I believe that some of them actually don't understand special ed law around IEPs, 504s, disabilities, and even gifted and talented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a very strong district team that can help support that. And I'm familiar with the work that the SPLC is doing in terms of the consent decree. And we're also working closely with them and with the judges that are involved in that case to make sure that we are meeting the expectations. And part of that is about the training that schools need. Part of that is about making sure that we are doing audits on a frequent basis of our IEPs and other paperwork, and making sure that families know what their rights are and that information is being shared by the letter of the law. And so one thing that I will say is that if someone has a specific question or problem to where they do believe that something's not being done correctly, let us know, because those are things that our accountability team and our student support team will help either investigate or answer the question or redirect as needed, because you know, special ed is federal law. You know, this goes way beyond just what we're doing in terms of autonomy and accountability and in terms of our contracts that we have with schools. It's federal law, and we take it very seriously. And so if we know of a specific situation, or if there's a specific question around something being done right or something being done wrong, that's something that we need brought to our attention so that it can be addressed. But in terms of the Southern Poverty Law Center, we have unpacked each of the concerns and challenges with the consent decree, and we're making sure that we are prepared to speak to all of them, to address all of them, and to support our schools so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes that have been made in the past that landed us in that consent decree in the first place.
So one of the other questions, and this is a popular one that I've heard over the years, are you in favor of a policy that requires elementary and middle school charter schools to take a certain percentage of neighborhood children? Because it's been complaints over and over again that there's a good school that's a block from house, but I cannot get my child into that school. And so their child has to be bused across town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that concern. And, you know, certainly when we think about how we move forward with those 4 areas I mentioned earlier, everything's on the table in terms of discussion, right? And even school leaders talked about the idea of having some geographic zones, to your point, so that that choice is just based on a geographic zone. I don't know if that's where we'll land. We've got some consultants that will be working with us, and we're looking at what's happening across the nation. You know, we've got a unique scenario here in terms of our district being all charter schools. But one thing that I'm real clear on is that we're not as unique as we sometimes frame it as, because you've got other districts that have more charter schools than we have. They have the additional challenge of also operating a traditional school system. And so one thing that we're looking at is what is happening in Chicago and DC and Philly and Denver, and some of these other places that are grappling with school choice and school quality in much the same way as we're doing. And that's part of the work of our 5-year plan, is to unpack that. What is the feasibility of having geographic zones? And like I said, I don't know if that's where we'll land or not, but it's already been part of the discussion. If you know, looking at whether that's feasible or not, and what would that look like. We already have the geographic piece as one of the percentages for choosing a charter, but what would it look like if we expanded that? You know, so all of those are questions that are absolutely on the table, and that we need to really look at against national models to see what works and what doesn't, and also against our own geographic framework to determine what would be feasible as it relates to that. So when I think about the questions that were on the PowerPoint that I shared a bit ago, in terms of really unpacking quality, quantity, choice, and variety, that is one of the wonders about the choice piece. Is that the main driver for not going to a school near you? Is it about the quality of the school, or is it something else? And so data is absolutely needed for us to really be able to unpack that and answer that question in a most strategic way possible. But the short answer to your question is, looking at this from a geographic zone standpoint is not off the table, but I don't know if that's where we'll land.
Okay, so one of the questions, would you be open to creating an independent monitoring system for each school? Because as it stands right now, there's a lot of things going on. There's so many moving pieces. When people ask about education in New Orleans, a lot of times people are like, what part? I mean, I know I do that. What part are we talking about? Mm-hmm. So it is really hard to get data, but then even if they were reporting the data, they're reporting the data as they know it. Like I told you, I just sent an email explaining to my principal that if a child is in class with the dean all day, that is a form of in-school suspension. She thought it wasn't, right? And so if I don't know, I can't self-report. A lot of times we could definitely benefit from people actually independently knowing what these things are and kind of sitting and observing schools, talking to parents, talking to teachers, talking to administration, and creating some type of report to really report back to you what is going on in these schools. What is diversity by design? If you're holding seats for upper middle class and white children, is that discrimination? Are we investigating that? All of these things, right?
Yeah. So your question was about an independent monitor. Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Well, a lot of people in the community have proposed that we have a community element that gets trained, of course, in like educational standard, IEP standard. What is best practices? What is high quality? And understanding that we're in a space where our schools are not actually high quality schools, because when you go to schools in other places like California, they have TV studios, school newspapers, all of these things within the school building, right? Our children do not have access to, like when we talk about competing globally, our kids really can't even compete on a countrywide because they don't have the things that children in California, New York, these other places have. They just don't. They don't have access to it. They don't have exposure to it. But just in the I always used to make the comment that we're having a big vision for our schools, but most of the parents and community, our vision is getting our schools to law abiding and the basics. If we could get books, if we could get consistent teachers trained in their areas who cared about our children, if we could get healthy, decent food, if we could get PE, music class, if we could get just the basic things, our children's IEPs and 504s honored, then we can then talk about the big vision. But we're always talking about the big vision when we don't have the basics.
Yeah,
so when we talk about
I'm gonna push back a little bit on what you're saying, because everything is not broken, and we do have a lot of opportunities for our scholars, and by no means are we there yet. But I don't know of a single district. If you ask the superintendent anyway, I don't know of a single superintendent that will say we have arrived in terms of all the community needs being met. But we have a lot of amazing things happening at our schools and a lot of amazing programs. And when I tell you our scholars are rocking and rolling in some ways that I've been impressed by, and I've seen a little bit of everything. There's absolutely room for improvement. And for me, this hits on that variety piece, because I do think that there's a need for us to do more in terms of innovation and creativity. But I will not say that we don't have those things in place, because we absolutely do. I'm looking forward to going to visiting our career center on Thursday, which is amazing. Even the current location of the career center is a great opportunity for our scholars. But the new facility, I've seen some great CTE buildings, career and technical education buildings, and I would would put it up against any other career center in the nation in terms of what it's going to offer our scholars. It may not be enough still, because I mean, like I said, as a superintendent, I'm always looking for ways to improve, but I'm not going to own the fact that everything is broken, because we do absolutely have schools that are providing some innovative and creative programming and opportunities for our scholars. So one of the pieces that I'm looking forward to getting more information on is to make sure that where we have the gaps, we can identify, and then we can also look at what's needed to support what's missing. And you mentioned arts, and we do have some schools that have arts. We need more. I love arts education. We absolutely need more, but what does that look like in terms of facility location and programming and teachers to be able to do that? We don't have as many robotics teams as I would like, especially at the elementary level. How do we support our schools to be able to do that? Because one thing that has to be acknowledged is the fact that this workforce shortage is not just us here. There is a huge problem with getting teachers, and especially when you start getting into specialized areas like science and math, and even special education and ELA. There's a major problem getting teachers, and even from an adjunct standpoint, to be able to do a lot of what needs to be done. And so we're working with our community partners, including universities, on that, and working with our workforce development partners like GNO and other entities that can help us to create a scenario where we can attract and retain the teachers to be able to do more of the things that you're talking about. One thing that has been brought to my attention that didn't surprise me, but I've heard it over and over again around attracting and retaining teachers, is the crime in our city and the cost of living in our city, and both of those being barriers for attracting and retaining teachers. And so it's very difficult to have the programming that you're talking about when you don't have the staff. And again, this is a problem that I'm seeing nationwide as I talk to my colleagues. It's something that we can overcome. But it's going to take a community effort for us to overcome it, because it's not something that the school can only own, because some of this is going to be some of this will be necessary for us to do with community partnerships. And that's whether we're looking at, Brooke Randolph, maybe you teach pottery and you want to come and do a pottery class or something of that nature. And, Raymond Sweet, maybe you coach baseball and you want to do a sports math class or something like that. It doesn't have to be that these are necessarily full-time positions, but the community partnering piece will absolutely be necessary for us to improve the outcomes, because the workforce piece is not going to get better anytime soon from what I can tell.
So let me ask you this. How do you motivate schools to even take community partners? Because I know Charmaine Neville volunteered her services to several schools several times. It was turned down. A lot of community members have. So because, again, charter schools are autonomous, what they have is the ability to turn down community partners. And a lot of what I've been hearing from teachers has been toxic climate in the schools, not being given bathroom breaks, not being given lunch breaks, to the point where they leave the school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are problems that, like I said, send it to us. And if it's something that hits on the accountability piece that we need to investigate, then we absolutely do. And we circle back and make sure that when we get problems that cross our email, we make sure that we circle back to whatever the resolution is. And like I said, sometimes it might lead to a non-compliance issue, a non-compliance letter being issued. And sometimes it's just a matter of communicating a need. But, we can't address it at all if we don't know about it. And even with the autonomy that our schools have, at the end of the day, we do want to make sure that our babies are being taken care of and families are being treated respectfully. So, if it's something that we can help with, we absolutely will.
And we appreciate it, because you've done a wonderful job of listening to the community, hearing us out. The fact that you're here today, thank you so much. It really gives us hope in many improvements in our school, that number will change, that more of our schools will be A and B schools. So we will have more Black and brown and impoverished kids in A and B schools. And I believe that that's possible with great leadership. So thank you for your leadership and your vision. It's 6 o'clock, so we're about to open it up to questions from everybody else. But again, I want to say you had a tremendous job, and so far we really appreciate all of your energy, hard work, and vision. Don't think we don't.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the grace, and I just have to say that, you know, because I feel the pain, the trauma, the hurt that this community has been through around the education system. And so I really do appreciate the grace that you all have given me as we embark in this work. So thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate Dr. Williams. You were very transparent. You was very compassionate and honest. Thank you for being truthful, because that's what we want to hear. We want to hear honesty. We want to hear from our leaders that make the decision that you are here for the children. You are here able to and willing to listen to the parent, and you feel what the parent is going through with their child. So again, we thank you. We have the floor open now. I have a couple of our guests who put in the chat questions. I have so far I have Mr. Dave, Mr. Sweet, Mr. David, Mr. Dave again, Cash, and Miss Betty. So we're gonna ask each person, if you want to ask your question, make your comment or concerns, you are welcome to do so. We're asking you to limit to 2 minutes. Please limit to 2 minutes, because I don't want to bring in the Sandman. So
Val,
yes.
this is Betty. We have I think Alvin is still on the call.
Okay.
And Alvin, if you're still there, he's a student at Rooted School, and he had a question.
Okay. He have a question. Do he have to get off, or do you want to wait his turn? We're gonna let the student go first. I hope everybody don't mind. We'll allow the student go first, because he might have to go do his homework. I'm sure Dr. Wills would love the student go through his homework.
Absolutely, yes.
So we're going, Betty, can you introduce him? Is he still on?
Well, Dave, is Alvin still here?
Yes, I'm here.
He's
Okay,
here.
Alvin.
Hey,
Alvin.
Alvin.
Alvin, was that you last month on the show?
Yes,
Excuse me?
he was on.
Well,
He was
Okay,
on the
I
show
enjoyed
last month.
that. I really enjoyed hearing from you on the show last month. What's your question?
Thank you. Speaking more about educators, I myself, who is also a future educator, my question is, like, since you were talking about, like, what is there, like, no, like, not more like that, but like you were speaking about, like, our charter school systems and schools in general. But my question is, oh, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, what else is there to put in place in order to support our teachers more? Meaning, like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? Like, you being a part of the school board system, how are you going to help with teacher attainment, and also like with teacher shortage and teacher salary?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alvin. And I'm so happy to hear that you're one of a future teacher. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in the classroom one day. So I mentioned earlier about the surplus properties community meetings. One of the pieces that's on the table as we look at our properties is what would it look like to provide housing? And whether it's our school buildings or property otherwise, you know, what would it look like to have teacher housing, affordable housing for teachers? Because I do think that there's a space there to where we have teachers who would stay and would love to be here, but because of the cost of living being so high, they have to make decisions for their families. So that's one thing, is just taking a look at what we can do in terms of housing. Another thing is looking at some of the national models around helping teachers with deposits for apartments and that type of thing, and and even working with partners. I see we've got a friend here from Entergy. I mean, perhaps there's a way that they can get a teacher rate or for something. I don't know. But either way, just really being creative in terms of supporting teachers for what they need. The biggest thing I would say, Alvin, is asking teachers what they need. I do have a teacher advisory council, and we just started it, so we've not really had a chance to dig deep yet. And I know we've got Dave with UTNO here, and then Dave and I, we've been trying to meet monthly, but sometimes it happens and sometimes it don't, but we stay in contact about what teachers actually need, because I do think that one thing that I try to do is when we're solving problems to make sure that the people who are most heavily impacted have a seat at the table. So it's not something that we're doing to you, but we were doing it with you and for you. And the same applies to supports for teachers. So I know for sure that affordable housing would be helpful. And then other ways to improve their cost of living, like having, whether it's discounts or that type of thing. But beyond that, I'm looking forward to hearing from teachers about some of the gaps that they have that prevents them from either staying here in education or from staying in education, period. Because those statistics are overwhelming in terms of the number of people who are leaving the profession altogether. And again, that's not a Nola Public Schools issue. That's a nationwide issue that we're all facing. One thing that I'm interested in really digging in, and Alvin, you might be able to help me with this, because I think we look at education wrong in terms of changing to meet the needs of our current teachers. And what I mean by that is I'm Generation X, the best generation that ever lived. And I know y'all agree. And one thing that I have seen happen with Gen Xers and with baby boomers is complaining about millennials, right? And one thing that I say, y'all, millennials are old now, okay? And we've got Gen Z coming in as our newest teachers. And so from an intergenerational standpoint, what are we doing to meet teachers where they are? What are we doing to provide a Gen Z teacher who is 22, 23 years old, who might need something totally different from the majority of our staff? And so I really want us to lean into that. And I asked the question, what would Google do? How would Google solve this problem? Because we can't keep doing the same thing we've always done and expect different results as it relates to teacher retention. So those are just some ideas, Alvin. And like I said, you might be able to help me with that intergenerational piece.
Okay, thank you. Alvin, that was a good question. You always ask good questions. We really appreciate you, Alvin, being a participant of Just Beyond, especially tonight. We thank you, Alvin. Appreciate you. Next, we have Mr. Dave Cash. Everyone, please be reminded and follow Mr. Alvin. He was under 2 minutes, so please stay under 2 minutes. Thank you, guys, Mr. Dave. And next, we have Mr. Sweet. Mr. Sweet, you after Dave.
Good evening. How are you, Dr. Williams?
Hey, Dave. I'm great. How are you?
Good. And hey, Ashana, how are you? I think I asked my questions in the chat, and so I think you answered the question as I asked it. You kind of filled it in later, so I think you answered my questions. And I just, I shared that concern about the teacher pay raise. That's one thing we've seen, is that many schools haven't implemented it correctly. But that goes to Ashana's point too, about like lots of schools not knowing about the law when it comes to, gifted and talented, or, just special ed law in general. And yeah, I've seen that talking to my principal, who tells me about conversations with other principals who don't seem to even understand Bulletin 741, for instance, or basic like Louisiana educational law. So there's a lot of gaps, but by fragmenting the system, this is sort of like automatically going to happen. And so I agree with, what other people are saying, that a lot of these things wouldn't happen if we were under one roof. And I know you also think that that's true too, from our conversation, that that a lot of this fragmentation problems wouldn't happen if it was under one roof. So
thank you, Dave.
And I will add to what you're saying. The fragmentation in terms of information, that definitely is different, being in a decentralized school district, but a lot of our challenges really go back to some of the same challenges that urban cities are facing, and especially around the employment piece, because I'll double down on what I said, that we do have great things happening, and we could get a whole lot better faster if we were able to attract and retain the right talent to be able to do that. And that's something that we as a community have got to be committed to trying to grapple with.
Thank you, Dave. Next, we have Mr. Sweet.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here again. Good to meet you again. I want to lift up, that's my neighbor's dog. I want to lift up the things that you've already said and ask you about them. For instance, you talked about excellence, equity, and joy, and then a profile of a portrait of a high school graduate. Mm-hmm. And I think based on those 4 elements, we already have the formula for what a quality school looks like. The problem, as Dave eloquently put it, is that you cannot enforce that in these schools because of the autonomy that's associated with the charter. Not even with the charter program, it's with the state law, mm-hmm. which also needs to change, where the school district does a better job at controlling schools and running their own schools. So I ask you, do you see any appetite in your administration for no other reason and other than to take on a model school so that behavior can be replicated, or those things that make a school work can be replicated across the district and for charters to actually follow?
Thank you, Mr. Sweet.
A great question. So the short answer is, I don't know, maybe. And I say that because, that's all of that is part of the planning that we're doing and the data that I need to make the best decisions on how we move forward. I've been in this business for a minute, and I've seen things across the nation, internationally, actually. And a lot of the challenges that we have really are due to being an urban city. And some of it is about the charter piece in terms of some of the communication and maybe the data reporting pieces that could absolutely be improved. But one of the things that I wonder about is, when we think about school quality, how would we prioritize that? And if we had a list here on how we prioritize it and another list on what we have and what we don't have in terms of those things, so that we can really unpack to see exactly where we are. And that's part of the work that we're doing in terms of the planning that we're making for the next 5 years. One of the things that I really want to hone in on within that planning is looking at our persistently low performing schools. What would it look like for our schools that are persistently low performing to have a different level of autonomy? To have to earn autonomy, so to speak, or to have some scenarios to where there are certain non-negotiables that must be in place. Similar to what I described earlier about the contracts with some contingencies. So that's something that we've talked about in terms of just being able to make sure that as we identify quality, if we were to label our schools on several different fronts in terms of how we view quality, and look at the ones that have been persistently low performing year after year after year. What are the gaps that they have? What are the specific data points that have led to them having the ineffective outcomes? And then what's needed to improve that? And does that mean a different level of support? Does it mean a different requirement within their contract? Does it mean not renewing their contract? A lot of questions. I have more questions than I have answers right now about that. But my expectation is within the next 6 or 8 months, I'll be able to really go to bat in terms of how we're going to solve for our persistently low performing schools, because that's a major concern of mine. As a career educator, I know that our core job is to make sure these babies are prepared for life. Beyond high school. And if we're not meeting the mark on that, I do take that personally, and that does keep me up at night. And especially as I'm wondering what is it that's needed. And as we unpack that, that's when we'll start making decisions on how we move forward with the next iteration of our school district.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer, response. Good response, Dr. Williams. You are doing a fantastic job tonight. So we're going to let Betty be the last one. But before Betty, we have Mr. David Everest. Then we have Miss Morris. Then Betty. Miss Betty will be the last one. Thank you, guys. Mr. David, please,
All right,
everyone,
thank you.
please keep it to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I will, no doubt. Thank you so much. You make mention about, the schools that are not performing well and, having ideas as to what to do. Would you be open to establishing a program, if you will, for the lowest performing schools that doesn't tether them more tightly to the very metrics that label them as failing, but frees them from those metrics? For example, I mean, if you look at the metrics that evaluate our schools, all they really do is measure about how wealthy the students are and at what level of socioeconomics students are. They don't, like the Urban League and the other folks have done studies, and pretty much high-rated charter schools are parallel, certain demographics. And so, the current metrics that are in your contracts that are sent to you from the state and others, and in your national advisors, they're not metrics that are going to ever allow for a superintendent to really innovate with large groups of students that are coming from abject poverty. So would you be willing to craft a program that departs from current metrics that historically only really reward high SES and always punish low SES? Would you be willing to craft something different?
I will be willing to learn more about this and definitely have a conversation with you, because obviously you're not wrong in terms of socioeconomic levels informing outcomes in ways that it shouldn't. As a champion for equity, one of the things that I often say is we need equity work. As long as student outcomes are predictable based on race, socioeconomic level, zip code, as long as we can predict what those outcomes will be based on those things, we have to make sure that we're looking for other strategies to create equitable outcomes. So reach out to me, David. I would love to have a more conversation about that, because that level of creative thinking is what we really need as we move forward, because there's no cookie cutter way for us to move forward with this. And I say that, y'all, having worked in traditional school systems that are struggling and grappling with a lot of the same challenges that we have. And so I would absolutely love to have an additional conversation with you about that, David.
All right, great, thank you.
Next, we have Miss Morrison, then Miss Betty. Miss Morris. Okay, while we wait on Miss Morris, Miss Betty, you can go.
Yeah, well, my question, this is Betty DeMarco. My question actually is very similar to David's, because I have a niece who teaches in Arkansas. She's a 5th grade teacher, an excellent teacher, but she constantly complains about the way the schools are being measured. And just recently, there was an article in the paper about a young woman who came here to teach, who left the teaching profession because she hated the way that that constant testing kids and really not being able to get to their needs. And she's now doing a program on the weekends that she says kids are begging to come to. It's a science program. So my question is, what can we do as a community? It's not y'all, it's not the school board, it's not Dr. Williams. How do we get legislators to start looking at how we measure a school's success without testing everybody?
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I think that's the right question to ask too, Betty, because accountability is a boogabear. There's no perfect accountability system that I've seen anyway. And it does create a scenario to where it's looking at kids through the lens of either race, socioeconomic levels, special needs, language, and so forth. And I do know that our state has had some pretty healthy conversations around some accountability changes. And I think you kind of answered your own question. The way we impact that is by making sure that we share our concerns with our legislators. But if we could do that as a unified front, and have some specific asks, I think that would be ideal. The first step to that is making sure that we completely unpack and understand our current accountability system, because nothing would be worse than us having, demands or whatever the case may be. And then we're like, oops, oh, that's what that meant, that type of thing. We want to make sure that we understand the current model and any proposed changes that are there. And I'm a big believer that bring problems, but also bring solutions. So what would an effective accountability system look like? Is there a state model out there that we can look at and say that this particular model recognizes poverty and recognizes the fact that we have 40 different languages within one school, or whatever the case may be, right? And so, I do think that there's a space there where some research in terms of other accountability models, because again, that's something that most states grapple with, every 3, 5, 8 years, there's a new accountability system. Sometimes it's literally a new test, and sometimes it's just looking at the calculations differently. But either way, it's absolutely something that the community can weigh in on. But I just think it would be best to do so as a unified front, and in such a way that we are able to unpack what we currently have and be real clear on what we think would be a better measure in terms of accountability.
Okay, thank you. Next, okay, wait, I'm gonna try Miss Morris. Miss Morris. Okay, Miss Brooke Randolph. Oh, we're gonna let you be the last one. You're gonna close us out, Brooke. Then Pastor Manny gonna come and close us out. I'm sorry, Brooke, not you, but Pastor Manny gonna come in after you.
Okay.
Okay.
Mine is just a quick comment, and that is that I'm a former special ed teacher, but I taught many other things as well. And I just, I'm a talker. I gab with people, and I find other teachers everywhere, and some are from New Orleans and some are not, but most of us are retired. And I keep thinking there's an army of us out there that you could utilize in some way, so, we need to tap into them as just, even if the old teachers are just support, I just think that it could be useful to you.
I completely agree. And when we open up our one-stop shop, I can envision there being a space for retired teachers for tutoring or counseling, whatever the case may be. I can absolutely see that being, maybe that'll be where the Retired Teachers Association office is, in that same space. But I absolutely, definitely see our retired teachers as part of the solution. I want to close by saying thank you to each and every one of you for listening, those who are listening later as well. Thank you to the Orleans Parish School Board for their confidence and faith in me in doing this work and support, and for all of NOLA PS. And I want to just encourage everybody, please support our scholars, y'all, because we can have all these conversations all day long and finger pointing and whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, these babies need us. And they need us being great role models for them and providing the supports that they need. Check out our social media because we regularly push out information. Courtney Washington, our Chief Communications Officer, and I do what we call Talk Soup Roundtable, where we are meeting with our scholars and we're talking about mental health. We're talking about trauma, and they're leading the discussion. They're telling us, what some of their challenges and what their needs are. And we need to listen because we're not going to get better if we don't allow our scholars to be heard, and for them to know that the problems that we have are not their their problems to solve, but they absolutely deserve a seat at the table as those discussions are being had. So again, I'm grateful to have been here, Ashana. You're awesome, and I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Dr. Williams, before you go, I just have one final question. I love that you mentioned joy and joy being a part of the framing of your vision. But can you just say for a minute, you coming into the city of New Orleans, what do you find unique about the city of New Orleans, and what gives you joy about this new position, and really impacts or helps inform the way that you're shaping your vision, that New Orleans is not like any other city on earth, and we know that full well. And so what really do you see unique and thus helps you frame your vision?
Yeah, so I mean, the joy is just the culture of our city. The culture of this community is so filled with love and passion. And passion can look a lot of different ways, right? And I think one of the things that motivates me is just feeling how passionate the community is about our babies and about our schools, and pushing to make sure that our schools truly reflect what our community deserves. And that energizes me, because shame on all of us if we're not fighting for something better, right? I will say again, everything is not broken, but I so applaud the groups and the individuals who are consistently pushing us as leaders to fight for something better. And that's what gives me joy, just knowing that we're all fighting the good fight. And I believe, I have faith in God and faith in the work that's being done, that we are going to improve outcomes for these babies, and we are going to make a difference. And I'm grateful to have the support of a community to push me in that vein. And that absolutely brings me joy.
Dr. Williams, thank you. We are all in this together, and thank you for making that clear. Ashana Bigard, thank you for being here and being our guest moderator for tonight. Yes.
Thank you.
Ken, we also have the school board was on the whole time. We want to appreciate the school board for coming the whole time, and we thank you. We acknowledge you. We appreciate you making these schools, the superintendent, the principals, the teachers accountable of their action when they come before you. That means that we realize and we know that we elected the right person to sit in that seat to take care of our children. So again, we do thank you, the school board. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Shout out to Alvin tonight. We are so glad that this young scholar and future educator joined us tonight, and we want to make sure that you all, if you know of young people that need to be a part of these conversations, please invite them to be back and to join us for these very important conversations, so that they can become activists and fighters for justice and equity and accessibility and accountability as well. Again, thank you to our guests, Ms. Bigard, and also Dr. Williams. We thank you so much. As we prepare to close on tonight, we want to take any announcements that anyone may have, any events that we need to be made aware of so that we can participate in them, or anything else. Are there any announcements at this time?
Yes, I have one announcement. RTA will have a very important meeting tomorrow. You can join them in person at 2817 Canal Street at the RTA building at 8:30. When supposed to be the executive committee, supposed to be announcing the new CEO. And at 10 o'clock is the RTA Commissioner Board meeting, same place. If you cannot join, you can also join them online. Go to norta.com. Thank you.
I have a quick announcement. Erase the Board and Southern Poverty Law Center are having a legal clinic on tomorrow. I believe it's at 5:30. If I don't have the details in front of me, but if you go to Erase the Board's webpage or Instagram, it should be up there, Southern Poverty Law Center. So if you know of any parents that are not sure of their rights, we're just going to have actual lawyers telling them what their rights are around discipline, IEP, 504 plans, etc. Because a lot of parents don't know their rights or how to approach or navigate the system.
All right, very important. Go to Erase the Board. Thank you, Ashana. Anyone else?
Yes, Courtney Washington here, Chief Communications for Nola PS. I dropped an announcement in the chat, but I just want to reiterate it that we're doing our spring community canvas to help promote attendance, and we are inviting the community and all of you to join us. So there's a number in the chat, and if you're listening on Facebook, you can follow our Facebook and our Instagram page as well, and the information is there to confirm your participation. And I also wanted to reiterate something that Dr. Williams mentioned. We do have, we are accepting applications for early childhood, so visit our website, enrollnola.com, and you'll have the information there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Courtney. Anyone else?
Yes, thank you, Reverend Manning. I would love to invite everyone. Local 527, United Teachers of New Orleans, is having a celebration of our 85th anniversary, and on March 25th at Greater Tulane Baptist Church at noon. And we would love for you all to come and join us in our celebration of our venerable history. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I thought it would be too early to announce an event March 25th, but you making that announcement made me know that it's not too early. So March 25th, we are having our grand opening of Broadmoor Community Church, my church, 2021 South Dupree, as a community lighthouse, along with Bethlehem Lutheran Church on Washington Avenue as a community lighthouse. What does that mean? It means that we are outfitted with commercial grade solar panels and battery backup storage, so that in the event of a widespread power outage like the one we saw in Hurricane Ida, we're able to power up and continue to serve the needs of community in order to make sure we can have people in here as a cooling center. We can refrigerate medicine, we can serve food, and we're ready to go. We're gonna have a grand opening March 25th at 2 o'clock here at Broadmoor. We'd love for you to join us. Please mark your calendars and save the date. Any other announcements? All right, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and conclude. And as usual, we always conclude with a word of prayer as we go our separate ways on tonight, remembering that we'll meet again next week. Please join us. Does anyone on this call feel led to lead us in a closing word of prayer? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to take the liberty to do that. May God bless each and every one of us as we go our separate ways on tonight. God, keep us safe, keep us ever working for the benefit of all and not just ourselves, God. Help us to love each other, to care for each other, to bring peace to our communities in whatever way. And God, we thank you for the reminder today that it takes a village to raise a child, oh God. And so we ask that you would help us to teach a child, to mentor a child, to tutor a child, to read a book to a child, to love on a child, to encourage them to know that the sky's the limit, that their dreams are achievable, and just to help provide for them in whatever we can by showing compassion and love to one another. Bless the parents, the grandparents, all of those who are helping to support their children and all students. Bless Dr. Williams and all of her work and the work of the school board and every teacher so that they have everything that they need, including housing and food and gasoline and all that they need to support their families. Help us rise up so that we care for our teachers in as much as we care for our athletes and everyone else. We ask this in the name of Almighty God and my Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. God bless you all. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week.
All right. Be safe. Bye-bye.